I've lived my entire life in Rhinebeck, a quiet town tucked in the Hudson Valley of New York. To most people, it looks like the kind of place where nothing ever truly changes. The brick sidewalks lined with cafes, the historic mansions looming on the hills, the air carrying a weight of stories too old to be remembered. I grew up here with my mother, Margaret Pierce. She raised me alone, and though she was not wealthy, she gave me everything I needed: discipline, care, and love that never wavered. I had no reason to question my life, and yet, for as long as I can remember, there was always a shadow inside me, a small whisper that I didn't entirely belong. That feeling often surfaced in the smallest of ways. At family gatherings with friends, when people compared old photographs of their children to grandparents long gone, I'd sit quietly wondering who I resembled. My face never matched the lines of anyone else's history. Margaret would smile and brush my hair from my face, telling me not to worry, that I was hers and that was enough. And for many years I told myself it was. I kept busy with school. By the time I turned 24, I was a final-year medical student at Columbia University in New York City, commuting between the intensity of the city and the comfort of Rhinebeck. My days were filled with lectures, hospital rotations, and endless textbooks. But at night, when I returned home, the silence sometimes pressed against me in ways I couldn't explain. It was as if a part of me belonged to a world just out of reach. One chilly afternoon, I was walking through the streets of Rhinebeck after running errands. The wind carried a bite, and the last leaves of autumn scraped along the pavement. My coat was buttoned to my chin, my satchel heavy with notes. That's when she appeared, an old woman, wrapped in layers of wool, with eyes dark and sharp beneath a faded scarf. She stepped directly into my path, forcing me to stop. "You," she said, her voice roughened with age, but piercing. "I know that face." I stiffened, unsure whether to laugh it off or push past her. But before I could react, she reached forward, and her gaze fell to the silver chain around my neck. The small pendant I always wore slipped from beneath my sweater, as if on cue. It was nothing special to me, just a keepsake I'd had for as long as I could remember, something Margaret had told me was mine since infancy. The woman's hand trembled. Her lips parted as if she'd seen a ghost. "That pendant," she whispered, "it belongs to the Hartwell family. Do you understand me? It was Isabel's, Isabel Hartwell's." Her words sliced into me. I felt a rush of confusion, even anger. The Hartwells were not strangers to anyone in Rhinebeck. Their name carried weight here. Old money, old traditions, a lineage spoken of with reverence or envy, depending on who you asked. But what did that have to do with me? I yanked the chain back, tucking the pendant under my sweater. "You're mistaken," I said quickly, heat rising in my cheeks. "This is mine. It's always been mine." The woman only shook her head, eyes never leaving mine. "No mistake. I knew Isabel. And you are her mirror." The street around me blurred. My breath came sharp and uneven. For a moment, all I could hear was the pounding of my heart. I wanted to walk away, to dismiss her as a rambling stranger. But I couldn't. Something in her voice, something in the certainty of her stare, clung to me like frost on glass. Finally, I managed to step around her, muttering, "You don't know what you're talking about." My legs carried me quickly, almost desperately, down the block. I didn't look back, but I felt her eyes burning into my spine. By the time I reached home, my anger had cooled into unease. I stood in front of the mirror, pulling the pendant free from beneath my sweater. The metal was cool against my palm, the engraved pattern faint but distinct. I had worn it every day of my life without a second thought. But now, every curve and line seemed heavy with questions I couldn't answer. That night, long after Margaret had gone to bed, I sat awake with the pendant in my hand. The old woman's words replayed again and again. It was Isabel's. "You are her mirror." I told myself it was nonsense. I told myself it meant nothing. But deep inside, where that whisper of not belonging had always lived. The words rooted themselves like seeds waiting to grow. And for the first time, I began to wonder if my life had been built on a truth I was never meant to know. The encounter with that old woman should have faded into the fog of strange, small-town moments, the kind that make you shake your head and move on. But it didn't. Her words clung to me, gnawed at me through sleepless nights and restless days at the hospital. I told myself it was nonsense, but the seed she planted refused to die. A week later, I was walking across the Columbia University Medical Campus in Manhattan. The winter light was pale, the kind that makes everything look sharper, colder. My bag dug into my shoulder as I hurried toward the library, my mind already heavy with case studies and exams. That's when I noticed him, an older man, standing by the gates that led to the medical building. He didn't look like he belonged, his posture too rigid, his long coat too fine, the kind of tailored fabric you don't often see on this side of campus. His silver hair was combed back neatly, his hands resting on an ornate cane. There was a dignity about him, a presence that demanded attention even in a crowd. At first, I thought he was waiting for someone else, but his eyes, gray and piercing, locked on me the moment I stepped through the gate, and he didn't look away. I slowed, uncomfortable under the weight of his gaze. There was something unsettlingly familiar in the lines of his face, though I couldn't place it. I might have kept walking if not for the way his lips parted, trembling as if he'd just seen a ghost. Then, without warning, the color drained from his cheeks. His knees buckled, the cane clattered to the pavement, and before I could even react, the man collapsed. "Sir!" My voice rang out, sharp and panicked. Students scattered, some running forward, others shouting for help. I dropped my bag and knelt beside him, my training kicking in through the haze of shock. His pulse was weak, but present, his breathing shallow. "Call emergency services." I barked, already loosening his collar, checking his airway. My hands shook, not from inexperience, but from the piercing intensity of the way he'd looked at me seconds before falling. Within minutes, paramedics arrived. I rode with him in the ambulance, my heart racing in a way I couldn't explain. Something tethered me to him, something that made me feel I couldn't leave his side. At the hospital, he was stabilized quickly. They wheeled him into a private room, and though I wasn't family, I lingered outside, my chest tight. I should have left. I had classes, rounds, a life to get back to. But when the nurse waved me in, saying the old man kept asking for the young woman, I couldn't ignore it. Inside, he lay against the pillows, his skin pale, but his eyes alive, fixed on me with an intensity that made my breath falter. His lips moved, voice raspy but clear enough. "Isabel," he whispered. I froze. The name meant nothing to me, and yet the way he said it, soft, reverent, full of aching loss, sent a chill through me. "No," I started, shaking my head. "You've mistaken me for someone else." His hand lifted slightly from the sheets, trembling as it reached toward me. "You look just like her," he murmured. "My daughter, my Isabel." His eyes filled with tears, the kind of tears you don't shed for strangers. I stepped back, my throat tight. "Sir, I don't know who you think I am. My name is Vivian Pierce." But he shook his head, his grip tightening around the memory of a name. Then, with a strength that startled me, he whispered words that carved straight through my chest. "My granddaughter. You're my granddaughter." The room spun around me. For a moment, I couldn't hear the beeping monitors or the shuffle of nurses outside the door. All I could hear was that single word, granddaughter, echoing in the hollow spaces of my doubt. I wanted to deny it, to laugh at the absurdity, but my body betrayed me. I pressed a hand to the pendant beneath my sweater, the same one the old woman had recognized. And for the first time, I felt its weight like a chain I could no longer ignore. I didn't sleep that night. The words the old man had whispered, my granddaughter, echoed through me like a curse I couldn't silence. By morning, my head ached from turning it over and over, but no answer made sense. I tried to tell myself it was confusion, the kind of mistake anyone could make under stress. But deep inside, I knew it wasn't that simple. When I returned to the hospital later that day, I found my mother waiting outside the private room where the man, Edward Hartwell, as I'd learned from the staff, was resting. Margaret Pierce stood with her arms crossed, her posture taut in a way I'd never seen before. She looked as though she had been carved from stone, her lips pressed tight, her eyes sharp with a mix of fear and resignation. "Mom." My voice trembled, surprising even me. "Why are you here?" She didn't answer at first. Her gaze slid past me to the closed door, then back again. "We need to talk," she said finally, her tone heavy. Inside the room, Edward stirred when he saw her, his expression flickering from exhaustion to fury and then to grief. "You," he rasped, his voice shaking. "You knew. You kept her from me all these years." My stomach clenched. "What is he talking about?" I asked, looking between them. Margaret turned to me, and for the first time in my life I saw her falter. Her eyes glossed with tears, and her hands trembled as she reached for mine. "Vivian," she whispered, "I never wanted to tell you this way." I pulled back instinctively, my pulse racing. "Tell me what?" She drew a shaky breath, as though forcing words that had been buried for decades. You're not my biological daughter." The air left my lungs all at once. The walls seemed to tilt around me. "What are you saying?" "You were born to Isabel Hartwell," she continued, her voice cracking on the name. "Edward's only daughter. She died more than 20 years ago. On the night you came into this world, she placed you in my arms and begged me to raise you as my own. I promised her I would." My knees threatened to give out. I clutched the chair beside me, staring at her as though she were a stranger. "That's not possible. You're my mother." "I am your mother," she said quickly, stepping closer. "In every way that matters, I am. But the blood in your veins, the life that began before I held you, it came from her." I shook my head, but the old woman on the street, the pendant, Edward's tears, all of it crashed together in my mind like pieces of a puzzle snapping into place. The room felt smaller, suffocating. Edward's voice cut through the fog, raw and broken. "She was my daughter, my Isabel. And you are her child, my granddaughter." I wanted to scream, to demand they both stop, to shove the truth back into whatever dark place it had been hidden all these years. But my voice failed me. Instead, I looked at Margaret, the woman who had raised me, comforted me, cheered for me, and for the first time I saw guilt etched into her features. "You lied to me," I managed to whisper. Her face crumpled, and tears slid down her cheeks. "I kept the secret to protect you. Isabel's life was filled with tragedy and danger. She didn't want you bound by the weight of the Hartwell name. She wanted you free. I did what I thought was right." But the words barely reached me. My chest burned, my heart hammering with betrayal and disbelief. Everything I thought I knew about myself, about her, was unraveling at once. I pressed my palm to my mouth, fighting for air. "So all this time," I said, my voice shaking, "I was never really yours." Margaret's sob broke the silence. She reached for me, desperate. "You've always been mine, Vivian. I loved you as fiercely as any mother could. But I couldn't tell you the truth. Not until now." I turned away, tears burning my eyes, my reflection in the hospital window a blur of confusion and grief. For 24 years, I had built my life on the foundation of her love. And now, in the span of a few minutes, that foundation had cracked, leaving me suspended between the mother who raised me and the mother I never knew. And for the first time, I wondered if I truly belonged anywhere at all. That night, Margaret placed a small wooden box on the kitchen table between us. Her hands lingered on the lid as though she were afraid to open it. I sat across from her, my pulse loud in my ears. The house was quiet, too quiet, and the weight of the truth already spoken still pressed down on me. Finally, she slid the box toward me. "This has been yours since the day you were born," she whispered. I kept it safe until the day came when you had to know. Inside lay an envelope, yellowed at the edges, the handwriting elegant and fragile. My breath caught. I picked it up, feeling the paper brittle beneath my fingers. On the front, in faded ink, was written simply, "For my daughter." I hesitated, my vision blurring as tears pricked my eyes. With trembling hands, I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The voice that emerged from the page was not mine, not Margaret's, not Edward's. It was a woman's voice, my mother's, Isabel Hartwell. "My dearest child, if these words reach you, it means I am gone. I prayed I would live long enough to hold you, to guide you, but fate was cruel. Still, I need you to know who I was, and why I chose the path that led us here. I was born into the Hartwell family, one of the oldest names in Hudson Valley. Our house was grand, our halls cold, our lives ruled by duty. From the time I was a girl, I was told my worth would be measured by the man I married. And so, before I was even ready, my father arranged my engagement to Andrew Cavendish, a man of wealth and ambition, but not of kindness. But then I met Daniel Foster. He was nothing like the men in our world. He worked with his hands, he spoke with honesty, and when he looked at me, he saw me. Not the Hartwell name, not the fortune, just me. For the first time, I knew what it meant to be alive. I loved him, and I chose him, even though it meant defying my family, losing everything they promised me. I walked away from the grand estate and the legacy they prized, and for a few short months I was free. We lived in a tiny rented room above a shop in town. It was nothing, and yet it was everything. I was happy, carrying you beneath my heart, dreaming of a life where love mattered more than duty. But Andrew did not forgive. He followed us, humiliated by the scandal of being left behind. One night, he found us on a quiet street. He drew a knife, and before I could even scream, he struck Daniel down. I watched the only man I had ever loved bleed into the snow, while Andrew's eyes burned with hate. I can still hear the sound of Daniel's breath fading, and the silence that followed. The shock broke me. That very night, labor began. Too soon, far too soon. My body gave way under grief and fear, and I knew I would not survive. That's when Margaret found me. She was the nurse who answered my cries, who delivered you safely into the world. She was a stranger, yet in that moment she became my salvation. I begged her to take you, to raise you far from the reach of the Hartwell name, far from the cruelty and pride that destroyed us. I wanted you to grow up free, to live a life chosen by love, not duty. She promised me she would protect you, and I trusted her with my last breath. Please, my child, never believe I abandoned you out of lack of love. I gave you away because I loved you too much to let you be caged as I was. You may never know me, but I have known you every day of my short life. And if you carry anything from me, let it be this. Live fully, love bravely, and never let anyone else write your story. With all the love I cannot give in person. Your mother, Isabel Hartwell. The letter slipped from my hands onto the table. I pressed my palms to my face, sobs ripping through me as the words echoed in my chest. The pieces of my life that had never fit together suddenly aligned into a picture too painful to bear. My mother had died, giving me life. My father had been murdered before he could hold me. And the family name that should have been mine was built on pride and cruelty. I looked at Margaret, who sat across from me, her shoulders bent beneath invisible weight. She trusted me, she said softly, and I kept my promise. But all I could feel was the sharp edge of loss, of a life stolen, of a mother I would never know except through fading ink on a page. A few days later, I found myself once again at the hospital, sitting in a chair across from Edward Hartwell. His color had returned slightly, but his frame still seemed fragile beneath the fine blanket that covered him. His eyes, though, had lost none of their intensity. When they met mine, I felt the weight of decades pressing between us. He gestured weakly for me to sit closer. I obeyed, though my chest tightened. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he cleared his throat, his voice gravelly with age and grief. "When Isabel disappeared, I searched for her everywhere," he began, his gaze fixed not on me, but somewhere far beyond the sterile walls of the room. "I sent men across the valley, down into the city, even into other states. But she was gone, as though the earth had swallowed her whole. For weeks, I clung to the belief that she would return, that she would realize her place was with her family, with me. I told myself I had done the right thing, arranging her future, securing the Hartwell name." His jaw clenched, the muscles twitching as though he were trying to hold back emotions too large for his frail body. But then the whispers began. Townsfolk spoke of a girl who looked like Isabel, living in a small rented room with a man they called Daniel Foster. And then, one night, news reached me that Daniel had been killed, stabbed in the street. And Isabel, he swallowed hard, his voice breaking. Isabel died soon after. My breath caught, the words sinking into me like stones. I gripped the armrest of the chair, willing myself not to cry, not to collapse under the weight of the story I had already begun to piece together through my mother's letter. Edward's hands trembled as he pressed them together. I never knew there was a child. No one told me. If I had known, his voice cracked, and his eyes shimmered with tears. If I had known, I would have moved heaven and earth to keep you safe. Instead, you grew up without me, without her, all because of my pride, because I thought I knew best. The bitterness in his tone startled me. He shook his head slowly, his gaze falling to the blanket. I raised my children under the weight of duty. I told myself it was love, but it was control. I believed our name meant more than happiness, more than choice. And in clinging to that belief, I destroyed the one person who dared to defy me. My Isabel paid for my arrogance with her life. The silence between us was thick. I stared at him, my chest a battlefield of clashing emotions. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to blame him for the pages of my mother's letter that had stained me with grief. It was his stubbornness, his blind obsession with honor, that had pushed her into the arms of danger. But another part of me, softer, unwilling, saw the old man before me, broken by regret, haunted by ghosts he could never bury. I swallowed, my voice barely audible. You don't understand what it's like for me, to grow up with questions that never had answers, to learn that my parents died before I ever knew them, and to realize it might never have happened if I stopped, the words trembling on my tongue. If you had let her choose love over duty. Edward closed his eyes, a single tear sliding down his weathered cheek. You're right, he whispered, and I would give everything I have left to undo it. But regret is all that remains to me. Regret and you. I looked away, my throat tight, my heart aching with a strange, impossible mixture, anger and pity, bitterness and compassion. I wanted to hate him, but hatred felt too simple. He was the architect of my mother's tragedy, yet he was also a father mourning a daughter he could never bring back. In that moment, I understood the cruel truth. The sins of one generation had bled into the next, and now I was the one force to carry their weight. I had thought the worst part of the truth was hearing it, but living with it was harder. For days after Edward's confession, I drifted through life like a stranger in my own skin. Every hallway of our house in Rhinebeck, every corner of my childhood felt unfamiliar now, as if the walls themselves had been in on the secret, watching me grow up in ignorance. I would catch my reflection in the mirror and see not myself, but questions I couldn't answer. The betrayal cut deepest when I looked at Margaret, the woman who had raised me, loved me, tucked me into bed after nightmares. Suddenly, she was also the keeper of the lie that defined my life. At night, I lay awake replaying every moment, the times I had asked about my father, the times I had wondered why we had no family photographs, no grandparents, no cousins. She had always smiled softly, deflecting my questions with half-answers. Now I knew why. One evening, unable to hold it in any longer, I confronted her. She was sitting in the living room, mending a loose seam on her apron. I stood in the doorway, my voice shaking with rage I could no longer swallow. How could you? The words tore out of me. How could you let me live my whole life believing a lie? Margaret set the needle down, carefully, her hands trembling. Vivian, no. My voice rose, sharp and desperate. You knew who I was. You knew my mother died. You knew my family was out there. And you never told me. Not once. Tears blurred my vision. Do you have any idea what that feels like? To find out that everything I thought I knew about myself isn't real. Her face crumpled. She rose slowly, crossing the room to me. I did it to protect you, she said, her voice breaking. Isabel begged me to. She wanted you to have a chance at a life untouched by the Hartwells, by their cruelty, their pride. I couldn't take that away from you. Protect me. I shouted. You didn't protect me. You stole my choice. You decided I didn't deserve the truth. My chest heaved as sobs broke free. I trusted you with everything. You were my mother, the only one I had. And now I don't know who you are anymore. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She reached out, but I flinched. The room pulsed with silence, broken only by my ragged breathing. For a moment, I hated her. I hated the lie, the stolen years, the weight of all I would never know about Isabel and Daniel. But then I saw her shoulders slump, her face lined with grief, and something inside me cracked. She wasn't the villain I wanted to make her. She was the woman who had kissed my scraped knees, who had sat through countless nights when I was sick, who had believed in me when I doubted myself. Every memory of her love pressed against my anger, demanding to be seen. I sank to the floor, my body trembling, the tears unstoppable. Margaret knelt beside me, hesitant, as though afraid I would push her away again. But when her arms encircled me, I collapsed into them, sobbing against her shoulder. I hate you, I whispered through my tears, but I love you too. I don't know how to do both. Her own tears dampened my hair. Then hate me, love me, whatever you need, she murmured. Just don't leave me, because I will never leave you, Vivian. You are my daughter, no matter what blood says. We stayed like that, tangled in grief and love, anger and forgiveness, until the storm of emotion softened. My heart still ached with betrayal, but beneath it, the truth pulsed steady. Margaret had lied to me. Yes, but she had also saved me. And in that contradiction, I realized the cruelest part of this truth. I was both Isabel's child and Margaret's. My life belonged to two mothers, one lost to the grave, the other bound to me by choice. And I would never again be able to untangle where one ended and the other began. It was Edward who broke the fragile peace that had settled over us in the days after the truth came out. I visited him again at the hospital, thinking he might want to speak more about Isabel. Instead, he looked at me with a new determination in his tired eyes. Vivian, he said, his voice steady despite his frail body, you don't belong in that modest house in Rhinebeck anymore. You belong with your family. You belong at the Hartwell estate. It is your right, your name, your blood, your inheritance. The words hit me like a blow. I sat back in the chair, my hands clenched together. What are you saying? I want you to come home, he pressed. Take the Hartwell name. Move into the house. It's yours as much as it ever was Isabel's. I will make sure everything I have left is passed to you. It is the least I can do to make up for the years you lost. I stared at him, the air thick in my lungs. Part of me ached for the possibility, an entire estate, a name recognized across the Hudson Valley, doors that could open for me simply because of blood. But another part recoiled. That name had also destroyed my mother. It had chained her to duty, strangled her happiness, and in the end, cost her life. If I accept, I whispered, then I become one of you. I step into the very world that killed her. Edward's jaw tightened. No, you redeem it. You carry it forward differently. You become what she should have been allowed to be, free, but still a Hartwell. I shook my head, my thoughts colliding in chaos. or I become a prisoner to a name she died escaping. The tension broke only when Margaret entered the room. She looked from me to Edward, her expression immediately wary. "What are you telling her?" Edward's voice hardened. "I'm telling her the truth. She deserves her rightful place in this family. She deserves more than a life of scraps, pretending she isn't who she is." Margaret stepped closer, her shoulders squared. "She deserves peace. She deserves freedom. That's why Isabel begged me to raise her away from you. And I'll not let you drag her back into the very cage her mother died fleeing." "Don't twist this," Edward snapped, his frailty masked by the weight of his words. "I loved my daughter, and I love my granddaughter. I have nothing left to give but my name and my estate. Are you asking me to let her walk through life nameless, when she could carry the legacy she was born into?" The two of them stared at each other, their unspoken war filling the space between us. My heart pounded, torn between the woman who had loved me all my life and the man who could tie me back to the bloodline I never knew. "I can't choose this now," I finally said, my voice raw. "I can't just erase one life to step into another. Don't you see? You're both pulling me in opposite directions, and I don't even know who I am anymore." Margaret reached for my hand, her eyes soft despite the tears gathering there. "You are mine, Vivian. That's all that matters." Edward shook his head, his own eyes shining. "No, you are Isabel's. You are Hartwell. That is what matters." And there, between them, I realized my life had split in two. Two truths, two loyalties, two mothers, and now two futures. Whichever choice I made, a part of me would always feel lost. In the end, I couldn't walk away from Margaret. Whatever truth I had uncovered, whatever bloodline bound me to the Hartwells, she was the one who had raised me. She was the one who had held my hand through childhood, who had sacrificed for me every single day. So when Edward pressed again for me to move into the estate, I shook my head gently. "I can't leave her," I told him. "She's my mother. No mansion or name could ever change that." His face fell. Disappointment etched into the lines of his skin. But after a long pause, he nodded. "Then I will come to you. If you won't live under the Hartwell roof, let me at least be a part of your life. Let me try, even now, to be a grandfather to you." I agreed, cautiously at first. The memories of Isabel's letter, of Margaret's confession, still burned too brightly. But over time I let him in. He began with small gestures, meeting me for coffee between classes, sending me rare medical books he thought might help with my studies. He asked questions about my rotations, my lectures, my future. And as the weeks passed, I noticed how his eyes softened whenever he looked at me, as though seeing Isabel all over again. At first, it unsettled me, carrying the weight of a resemblance I had never asked for. But slowly, the edges of that discomfort dulled. I began to see not just a grieving father, but a man trying to make peace with the ruins of his past. Margaret remained protective, her wariness never fully fading. She watched every interaction, careful, as though afraid he might pull me into the very world Isabel had fought to escape. Yet even she couldn't deny that something in Edward was changing. The hardness in his voice gave way to patience, his pride to humility. He was, perhaps for the first time, learning to love without control. Over dinners in Rhinebeck, I listened to him share stories of my mother as a child, her laughter echoing through the grand halls, her stubborn defiance when told what to wear, how to speak, who to love. Those stories painted her not just as a victim of tragedy, but as a living, breathing woman whose spirit pulsed within me. The distance between us slowly shrank. He stopped insisting that I move to the estate, stopped pressing me to change my name. Instead, he seemed content just to sit in my presence, as though every moment was a chance to rewrite the years he had lost. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped low over the valley, he placed a leather-bound notebook in my hands. His expression was solemn, almost reverent. "This belonged to Isabel," he said quietly. "It was found among her things after she passed. I've kept it all these years, but it's yours now." I opened it carefully. The pages were filled with delicate handwriting, words that trailed off mid-sentence, thoughts left unfinished, notes about dreams she had for her child, sketches of flowers, fragments of lullabies. It was not a diary of grand events, but the heart of a young woman who had loved fiercely even in the face of despair. My throat tightened as I traced the lines with my fingers. "She wrote this for me," I whispered. Edward's eyes glistened. "She did, and I should have given it to you sooner. But I wasn't ready. Now, I want you to have every piece of her that I can still give." In that moment, the bitterness between us eased. I still carried anger, still wrestled with betrayal, but I also carried something new, connection. Not just to him, but to the woman who had given me life, whose voice lingered now on the page before me. The day of my graduation arrived with the crisp brightness of early summer. The campus buzzed with celebration. Students in caps and gowns clustered for photographs. Families carrying flowers, professors shaking hands proudly with their students. As I stood among them, the weight of the robe across my shoulders felt heavier than fabric. It carried years of study, sleepless nights, and the secrets of a life I had only recently begun to understand. When the ceremony began, I searched the crowd from the stage. My eyes found them quickly. Two figures who could not have been more different, yet who now sat side by side. Margaret in her modest dress and cardigan, her face glowing with quiet pride, and Edward, regal even in age, leaning slightly on his cane, his silver hair gleaming in the sunlight. They did not speak much, but their presence together felt like a fragile miracle. As I accepted my diploma, applause filled the air. My heart raced, not just from achievement, but from the sight of them rising to their feet at the same time. For one brief moment, it didn't matter that decades of silence and lies had separated them. It didn't matter that I was caught between two worlds. On this day, they were simply there for me. After the ceremony, I walked toward them, my diploma clutched tightly in my hand. Margaret's eyes brimmed with tears as she embraced me first. "I'm so proud of you, Vivian," she whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. Then Edward stepped forward, his hand resting on my shoulder, steady and warm. "You've given me back a piece of my daughter," he said softly. "And more than that, you've become everything she dreamed you might be." I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. For so long, I had resented both of them, the lies, the pride, the choices that had carved wounds into my life. But standing between them now, I understood something deeper. My story was not just about what I had lost. It was also about what I had gained. That evening, after the celebrations ended and the campus quieted, I returned to my room. The leather-bound notebook Edward had given me lay on my desk. I picked it up, its weight grounding me, and sat by the window where the fading sunlight painted the sky in gold and violet. I opened to the unfinished pages, the fragments of my mother's voice, words she had written for me, words she had never been able to speak aloud. I ran my fingers across the ink, as though I could reach through time and touch her hand. Tears welled in my eyes, but this time they carried not only sorrow but gratitude. Gratitude for Margaret, who had raised me with unwavering love. Gratitude for Edward, who had finally chosen humility over pride. And gratitude for Isabel, whose sacrifice had given me life, whose spirit still whispered through every line of the notebook. I closed my eyes, clutching the book to my chest. "I found you," I whispered into the quiet. "Both of you." Outside, the evening deepened. The lights of Rhinebeck twinkled below the hills, steady and warm. For the first time, I felt a sense of belonging that no name or inheritance could give me. I belonged to the love that had raised me, the love that had sacrificed for me, the love that had endured despite everything. Family, I realize, is not carved only in bloodlines or legacies. It is written in choices, in the hands that hold you through storms, in the voices that guide you even from beyond the grave. As I held the notebook close, the last rays of sunlight spilled across the page, as though my mother's unfinished words had been illuminated for me alone. And in that glow, I felt whole. Not because the past had been erased, but because it had been faced, carried, and transformed. And so I whispered one last time a promise and a prayer in the same breath. I found both my mothers,